Welcome back to the Cannabis Podcast, and this is a great bit of news. Brazil becomes the largest nation to decriminalize marijuana. Also, the second BRICS nation, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, to also legalize. So you had South Africa, now you have Brazil. It'll be very interesting about what the rest of them do. Let's get into it. Brazil decriminalized marijuana for personal use, making the nation of 203 million the largest to take such a measure and the latest sign of a growing global acceptance of cannabis. Brazil's Supreme Court ruled that Brazilians could possess up to 40 grams of cannabis, roughly enough for 80 joints, depending on the size of the joint you roll, without facing penalties, a decision that would take effect within days and stand for the next 18 months. Interesting why it doesn't last longer than 18 months, but maybe they'll tell us. The court asked Brazil's Congress and health authorities to then set the permanent amount of marijuana that citizens could possess. There's our answer. Selling marijuana remains a criminal offense. Thousands of Brazilians are serving prison sentences for possessing an amount of marijuana below the new threshold. It's unclear how the decision would affect those convictions. Many are black men who represent 61% of drug trafficking prosecutions, but 27% of the population. Studies have shown thousands of black Brazilians have been convicted in situations that have led to lesser or no charges against white people. Brazil has long taken a harsh criminal approach to drugs, so its decision to effectively allow citizens to smoke cannabis is part of a remarkable shift in public opinion and public policy on the drug over the past 2 decades. More than 20 countries have now decriminalized or legalized recreational use of marijuana, most in Europe and the Americas. Mexico legalized marijuana in 2021, Luxembourg did so last year, and Germany did in April. We covered all of those, not Mexico in a separate video, which we'll get into a little bit later. Canada and Uruguay have allowed licensed sales of marijuana for years. Many more countries have decriminalized it, meaning they abolished criminal penalties for possessing small amounts of the drug, though it technically remains illegal and authorities still can target traffickers. In many cases, the changes have been part of a broader policy shift to treat drug use as a health issue rather than a criminal act. And that's the way it should be, because it's a medicine and a health issue, not a criminal act. Because how can a plant be a criminal? I don't know. Make it make sense. In the U.S., marijuana remains illegal at the federal level, but states are now able to set their own policies. Since voters in Colorado and Washington first approved recreational use in 2012, more than half of Americans live in states where marijuana is legal. We covered that as well. Check out the video. 70% of Americans now believe marijuana should be legal, according to a Gallup poll, from 31% in 2000. Brazil has had the opposite experience. While the country now has a more lenient federal marijuana policy than the U.S., far fewer Brazilians are in favor of the drug than Americans. Less than a third of Brazilians said they supported decriminalization of marijuana, according to a March survey of 2,000 people. Still, the liberalization in drug policy has led to changing attitudes in many parts of the world, according to Angela May, Chief of Research for the UN Office of Drugs and Crime. Brazil's Supreme Court decriminalized marijuana after nearly a decade of deliberation on a 2009 court case. That case centered on a 55-year-old man who was caught with 3 grams of marijuana while in prison on a separate charge in Sao Paulo. He was sentenced to 2 months of community service, but his lawyer appealed, arguing that punishing drug users violated Brazil's constitution. Now, I'm not very familiar with Brazil's constitution and their laws and legalities and everything, but it seems wild that you're now going to court 10 years later for 3 grams of weed that you had while you're already in prison. For what? I don't know what he was in prison already for. How do you get the weed? I'm not saying it's impossible to get weed in prison, but that's just a crazy context. Since 2015, the Supreme Court delayed ruling on the case as justices disagreed on how to distinguish between users and traffickers, what drugs should be decriminalized, and who should be in charge of setting drug policy. The court reached a majority on Tuesday and finalized its decision on Wednesday. It seems a little wild that it's taken 9 years to figure out simple questions like what's the difference between a user and a trafficker, what drugs should be decriminalized. I mean, it seems like a long time. So maybe they're just drawing this out for certain reasons that I'm not privy to. Just speculation. In the ruling, Chief Justice Barroso said the decision does not condone marijuana use, but rather recognized failed drug policies which have led to the mass incarceration of poor youth, pushing many of them into organized crime. At no point are we legalizing or saying that drug use is a positive thing. Just simply the strategies we've adopted are not working. Finally, people are beginning to admit it, with a lot of reluctance, I might add. In 2006, Brazil's Congress passed a law that aimed to increase penalties for drug traffickers and reduce them for users. The law called for softer forms of punishment for drug users, such as community service. Yet the law was vague on what constituted a trafficker, and critics say the police and the prosecutors have used it to put more drug users in prison. Yeah, because now it's just subjective. Oh, you're a user, or you're a trafficker, get them back in. Yeah, it's just a lot of corruption. 10 years after the law passed, the percentage of prisoners detained on drug charges rose from 9 to 28%. That's crazy. That's 3x. Studies show black men have been disproportionately affected. This we know. America's war on drugs is very, very obvious. One study of drug cases between 2010 and 2020 in Sao Paulo showed the police classified 31,000 black Brazilians as traffickers in situations where white people were treated as users, according to an INSPIR Institute of Education and Research, a Brazilian university. That's unfortunate because that's blatant racism for whatever the reason. In its decision, the Supreme Court aimed to clarify the threshold between possession and trafficking. The court said people could still be charged with trafficking if found with other items commonly used in drug sales, such as a scale. Yeah, if you're riding around in your car and you got scales and baggies and a lot of weed, 1 + 2 + 3. Come on now, people. Despite the new policy, Brazil still has some of the harshest drug laws in Latin America, which have helped fill the prisons. Brazil has the world's third largest prison population after the U.S. and China. Let me repeat that. Brazil has the world's third largest prison population after the U.S. and China. That's a wild statistic that a lot of people may not know. So this is a much needed change. Even before the new marijuana policy has been finalized, there were already efforts on Brazil's right to undo it. Conservatives in Brazil's Congress are pushing a bill that would modify the Constitution to criminalize any possession of marijuana. Congressional leaders have said that the issue should be left to Congress and that most lawmakers oppose decriminalization. Now, in Brazil, you have Javier Milei, who is the new president, which is supposedly a libertarian-leaning identifying candidate. A lot of dispute and debate about his leanings and which way he actually goes. I don't really know. Never met him, never talked to him, so I can't say. But I do know that anytime you decriminalize cannabis or a drug or things that are putting people in jail, it's a step in the positive direction. I don't want to say right direction because you might think I'm saying right versus left. That's not what I mean. I mean correct direction, not right. Okay, you get it. So Brazil, largest nation to decriminalize marijuana, even above the United States, because we haven't yet, and China, which probably never will, and Russia, I don't know. But anyways, this is the second BRICS nation, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, to legalize or decriminalize cannabis. BRICS. That's 2 of the 6. That's 33% of the nations in the BRICS alliance decriminalizing cannabis. That's a pretty wild statistic. But good news for all Brazilians. Just don't traffic it and sell it. It's still illegal. And brush up on your laws. But until next time, stay blessed and don't forget to tip your bud tenders.